The Mayo Experience.
Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, presented by Jägermeister. Give your beer a real shot this summer. The nice cold shot of Jägermeister. This is it. I've been putting this off, waiting too long to release my top 200 overall rankings for fantasy football season, the top 200 PPR players, and not everyone plays PPR. Some people play standard, and if you want that, then, well, you got to go somewhere else to go find those standard rankings. However, half-point PPR rankings are in the mix this time around. If you want to see my full list, check the description. If you want to see the full list of WRs Evan Silva, you check the list too in the description because it's going to be up there. You haven't updated them quite in a month, so when can we expect the update to come down, Evan?
Well, what I'm really focused on right now is doing my team-by-team fantasy previews. And that's really where I form my foundation for, the way that I am expecting players to produce, is just by breaking down teams and looking at, schedules and looking at projected usage and looking at, coaching histories and looking at expectations for offensive line play and expectations for defensive play and how that could impact game script. So I did do that preliminary top 150 at the end of May. And I mean, my takes haven't really changed a ton from there, but there definitely have been some changes. And when I finally finish these team previews, and I believe 8 or 9 left, I will put out a new top 150, ideally just as training camp is beginning. And then I will update that every once or 2 weeks throughout training camp in the preseason.
Yeah, the worst part is like when someone like Jordy Nelson or Kelvin Benjamin goes down directly in preseason, and people are like, wow, where are the new rankings at? Like 2 hours later. Let's calm down here just a little bit. I'll have my rankings updated. That same link will work, and I'll have Evan's updated too when he releases his new rankings in the description so you can get the most up-to-date stuff. I'll have timestamps in my rankings column because stuff's going to change. Guys are going to win training camp battles. It's going to be a bit of a fluid ranking here, but I wanted to get, first of all, before you start, how you actually assess your rankings, because I hear a lot of different people do a lot of different things. Some people are like, well, these are my projections are my rankings, and that's the order they have to go in. Some people like to weight ADP along with doing their rankings where they don't want to rank someone too highly just because maybe the projections say it, but let's say they're a 13th round pick, like why would I rank him in the 6th round? I'm kind of a mismatch of both. I try to take like my first 30 picks. That's the order I would take those guys in, depending on how I wanted to construct my teams and what pick I ended up with. Like if it called for me to take 4 running backs in the first 4 picks, I probably wouldn't do that. Some people say that's fine. I think I'd want a receiver or a tight end somewhere in there depending on the pick. But when you assess it, and I look at like your top 10 picks, is that the order that you would take those guys in?
Yeah, especially for overall rankings where we're grouping together positions as opposed to doing position by position rankings, I heavily factor in ADP, average draft position, because I really want to make myself a draft board or a cheat sheet. That's what I'm looking to turn this top 150 into. Like in April and May, I did best ball tiers by position. And for those, I started out with baseline stat projections, and then I adjusted based on changes in environment or supporting cast. But for my overall rankings, this top 150, I'm using those baseline projections as the starting point, and then I'm adjusting for ADP. And oftentimes it's a big adjustment because I want to have guys that I'm higher on than consensus, higher than their ADP in the top 150. And I want to have guys I'm lower on than consensus, lower than their ADP, because I don't want to be getting those guys unless they slip in the draft considerably. This year, Alvin Kamara and Melvin Gordon are guys that I have ranked purposely higher than their ADPs because I'm willing to draft them aggressively. Guys that I have lower than their ADPs are just most of the top 10 quarterbacks because I'm really not trying to get them. I'm really focusing on the QB 12 to quarterback 17 area to draft my QBs.
So I'm looking at your rankings, and when I came up with mine, I'm not going to be scared off by 0 RB not working last season, although I've always liked to take a fusion of both. If I can get one of these running backs that plays every single down, is involved in the rushing game, gets the goal line carries, and does all of his work out of the backfield. I want that guy. However, I'm not willing to just overlook some of the top-end receivers for guys that I have a few question marks with. So, my top 10 for 2018. I can't believe it's 2018, but here we are. Todd Gurley comes in at number 1. This is full PPR, mind you. Bell, David Johnson. Then I go Antonio Brown, DeAndre Hopkins, Odell Beckham Jr., then Kamara, Saquon Barkley, Elliott. Then I begin my receiver run of Michael Thomas, Julio Jones, Keenan Allen, Doug Baldwin, Devontae Adams, and A.J. Green. And I actually had Melvin Gordon next. Melvin Gordon was a really contentious one for me because I don't know why I'm so scared of it, but Austin Ekeler kind of terrifies me to eat into Melvin Gordon's just overall snap count and what he might be able to do out of the backfield.
Yeah, it's fair. I mean, last year there was about a 3-week stretch in November where Austin Ekeler really started to cut into Melvin Gordon's playing time and his touches. And then Austin Ekeler, being an undrafted rookie, cost the Chargers 2 games with late game fumbles. And, they couldn't trust him anymore. And then he broke his hand and he was done for the season. They went back to Melvin Gordon as the bell cow. But on this topic, the running backs versus the wide receivers early, I have 8 of the top 9 picks as running backs with Antonio Brown mixed in. It's Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, David Johnson. I think we have the same top 3. And then I have Ezekiel Elliott, number 4, Alvin Kamara, number 5, Melvin Gordon, number 6. I have more confidence in Melvin Gordon than you. Saquon Barkley, 7, and Kareem Hunt as my RB8. I'm going RB heavy this year. One of the biggest edges on your opponents in season-long fantasy is having a bell cow running back. There aren't many of them. They go off the board early. So if you're doing a lot of drafts, which I've already done over 400 drafts, just drafting on doing fast drafts on at play draft, they go really, really fast. And Alvin Kamara isn't quite a true bell cow in the mix with, Ezekiel Elliott and David Johnson and Le'Veon Bell in terms of projected workload, but his passing game volume and the high scoring nature of the offense that he plays in allows him to score like a true bell cow. And I think there is a chance that we get to see him be closer to a bell cow this year than he was last year, because he only averaged 7.5 carries per game last year, but he still finishes the overall RB4. And the Saints really started to transition to him as their lead back in the final 5 games last year, and they fed him on the goal line. In the last 5 games, Alvin Kamara had 7 carries inside the 5. Mark Ingram only had 1. Alvin Kamara played more snaps during that span and got more overall touches. And now Mark Ingram is going to be suspended for 4 games. And I think it's just conceivable that Alvin Kamara just runs away with this feature back job. He has 100 receptions in his range of potential outcomes.
Well, and Mark Ingram, people who are longtime fans of the show know my absolute disdain for Mark Ingram. He's ranked first in worst place because he will never make my rankings. I'll have to get you to throw him in there somewhere towards the end of this. But we saw this with Willie Snead a little bit last season too. He got busted for PEDs, and then the snap count was way down off what his career mark was. It just seemed like Sean Payton didn't like him anymore. He already didn't show up to voluntary OTAs earlier this offseason. He's suspended for 4 games. When he comes back, the conventional wisdom seems to be that Ingram's just going to come back and take over maybe a lesser part of the role, but someone who plays 40% of the snaps, 45% of the snaps, and maybe the Saints ride a hot hand every second week or so and he out-touches Kamara. I just don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I remember last year when Willie Snead became a value because of his suspension, and then he had 8 catches in 11 games. One scenario, you have to, what I like to do is, try to look at what is the worst case scenario and what's the best case scenario. Obviously, the best case scenario for Mark Ingram is coming back and, you kind of just plug in his fantasy points per game from weeks 5 through 16, and he's just the same guy. His worst case scenario is something along the lines of Willie Snead, and you have to understand in those first 4 games, somebody else is going to be getting opportunities to play alongside Alvin Kamara. And it could be Jonathan Williams, who he's a talented dude. The former Bills running back that they picked up. They drafted a dude named Boston Scott. He is a pretty interesting prospect for a day 3 running back. They went out and signed Terrence West. They tried to audition DeMarco Murray and Jamal Charles. But Terrence West actually looked the best in that tryout, and they went with him. And then they have a dude, last year was their number 3 back, Trey Edmonds, who already knows the system. They have a top 2 offensive line. They have an offense that is going to score points. They have a defense that at this point is good enough to be in, put their offense in a lot of run-friendly game scripts. And so another guy is going to be getting opportunities. If that other guy is good, who's to say that they're just going to take the ball out of his hands and go right back to Mark Ingram, who hurt the team by getting suspended and did not show up to OTAs, and Sean Payton expressed like displeasure with Mark Ingram not being there. He was like, I don't agree with this. I don't know why he's not here. He actually wanted a new contract even after getting busted for PEDs. So Mark Ingram put himself in a bad position, man. And I'm with you. He is a DND do not draft for me this year.
So just to recap the top 3. So you have the 3 running backs. You have Gurley, you have Bell, and you have David Johnson. I think those 3 guys are safe. They all come with, a bit of concern. Like you have some regression from Gurley. People have figured out Sean McVay's offense. It takes a little bit of a step back. Maybe he's not involved in the passing game as he was last year because he was averaging just under 6 targets per game. When you see Bell, he's holding out for training camp again, but he's going to play like 99% of the Steelers' snaps. But he doesn't always get the most consistent work near the goal line. Obviously, David Johnson, you're dealing with 2 new quarterbacks potentially in Arizona with Bradford and Josh Rosen. He's coming back off a wrist injury, and who knows what that offense is going to look like. But I just think volume-wise that those 3 guys are a cut above in full PPR scoring. And that second tier of running backs, and I'll have my full tiered PPR running back rankings along with every positional rankings out early next week, and you'll be able to find the link in the bottom of this description as soon as they're out, whether it's video, whether it's audio. However, when I'm looking at it, I like those 3 wide receivers right in between. I mentioned Kamara, Barkley, and Elliott. I went Barkley over Elliott. I just have concerns about Dallas's offense not being very good. And when I'm weighting full PPR scoring, I know the floor in terms of touchdowns and rushing yards is going to be there for Ezekiel Elliott, but I'm just not sure how involved he's going to get in the passing game. Now, with Barkley, I feel like if you're going to spend the number 2 overall pick on a running back, he's a guy who's going to be playing like 85% of the time, and we know that he can be so impactful in the passing game, and I think that would give him a slight edge to me. That does give him the slight edge to me, but you like Elliott better than both of them.
Yeah, I have Zeke right now as RB4 and Saquon Barkley as RB7, and I'm giving the edge to Zeke because, first of all, he's quote-unquote proven it. We've seen him 2 years in the NFL. He led the NFL in rushing yards per game in both seasons. And his offensive line is much better than the Giants. Elliott gets to play with a dual-threat quarterback in Dak Prescott that can help spike the rushing efficiency of the running game as a unit. And as you alluded to, where I do think that Saquon Barkley could become a threat to him is in the passing game. Saquon Barkley, I watched a ton of him coming out of Penn State. He reminded me a lot of David Johnson from a receiving standpoint. And the Cowboys have really resisted feeding Zeke in the passing game for whatever reason. It's just not a part of their offense, really. Zeke has averaged 2.3 targets per game over the last 2 years. Le'Veon Bell has averaged 6.4 targets per game, almost 3 times as many as Zeke Elliott. Alvin Kamara averaged 6.3 targets per game as a rookie. David Johnson has averaged 5.6. Todd Gurley averaged 5.8 last year. And I think that if the Giants are smart, they're going to feed Saquon Barkley in that range of 5 to 6 targets per game. This guy led all NCAA running backs in receiving yards and yards after the catch last year. They need to fill him up with targets.
Yeah, and when you go, I guess you can have sort of concerns on both sides if we're trying to make the case against a lot of these guys. Like with Kamara, Ingram comes back. Hey, that's not good for anyone's overall upside. In terms of Barkley, I mean, Jonathan Stewart's there, and I don't know why I find that. I just feel like the Giants could be a backwards franchise, and they'll be like, you know what? We're going to shock everyone and just use Jonathan Stewart around the goal line. But Dallas is kind of the same way. Like, why did they get Tavon Austin? I feel like that's what they're going to do out of the backfield, is throw to him, and it's just not going to work.
Yeah, that's actually another threat to Ezekiel Elliott's receiving usage. And I know it sounds silly to you and me, and it sounds very irrational, but the Cowboys, lots of teams, first of all, make irrational coaching decisions. The Cowboys are at the forefront of that. You mentioned Jonathan Stewart, and he is like kind of a legitimate concern at the goal line for Saquon Barkley's like touchdown upside. They have Jonathan Stewart's old OC, Mike Shula, came over. He's now the Giants OC. Over the last 3 years, Jonathan Stewart ranks top 8 in the NFL in carries inside the 5-yard line in each of those 3 seasons with Mike Shula calling plays. They're paying him, it's not a huge contract, but it's not minimal. I mean, it's a 2-year, $7 million deal. I think about half of it is guaranteed. At his post-draft press conference, their GM, Dave Gettleman, talked about he thought that Jonathan Stewart has lost no steps off of his prime, which that is not backed up by the data, but that's, how this team feels about this player that they invested in. And, is he just there to be a mentor to Saquon Barkley? I don't know about that. I think that he's going to end up getting on the field. It's just a matter of how is he going to be used? I can just totally envision it right now. We are, in the 3rd preseason game. Saquon Barkley and the Giants offense move the ball down the field on their first drive. They get down inside the 5. Saquon comes out. Jonathan Stewart goes in, scores the goal line touchdown, and it's like, oh my goodness, this is their goal line package, and Saquon Barkley isn't even on the field for this.
Yeah, I don't look forward to that whatsoever. So maybe it depends on where I pick in the first round. Is there an optimal pick, do you think, that you can build the best overall team around? Like, do you prefer just to have the first pick, get Todd Gurley? Do you like the swing pick at the end so you can load up on depth? Do you think you can pick in the middle? Because I've been, in the early drafts that I've been doing, it seems like around pick 7, 8, or 9, I can still get DeAndre Hopkins in that spot in full point PPR, and I'm very good with that. Like, sometimes Antonio Brown is slipping to like number 6, which I just think is ludicrous, but a lot of people are doing it. Maybe I'm the crazy one when it comes to it, but I feel like if you can get that sort of upside in the middle of round 1, what you're looking at coming back midway through round 2 and then midway through round 3 especially, because I really love Doug Baldwin this year, and you can get him there, but you can't get him at the end of round 3, depending on the league that you're in. I just think around the middle, I mean, ideally, I guess pick number 4 for me would be the best, so I could get one of the top 3 running backs or Antonio Brown. But if the ADP isn't shaking out that way, I would almost rather risk it. Take the 5, 6 pick just so I can get a better second round pick coming back. What's your preference?
Yeah, I listened to your crossover podcast with Levitan, and I mostly agreed with your guys' takes on this. I want the number 4 pick, and it's because I want to get one of those top 4 RBs, Gurley, Le'Veon, David Johnson, and to me, Zeke is in that tier. And then I think that there's a small teardrop after that to Kamara and Melvin Gordon and Kareem Hunt at the end and Saquon Barkley. But when I get that number 4 pick, I'm just taking whichever one of those top 4 running backs falls, and then I'm better positioned, as you mentioned, than the numbers 1 through 3 picks when it comes back around to me.
So in the 10, I go on a receiver run starting at 10. So I have Michael Thomas, then I have Julio, Keenan Allen, Doug Baldwin, Devontae Adams, AJ Green as that next tier of wide receiver. I know you have Julio as a part of that top tier with Brown, Hopkins, and Beckham. But then right after that, I go Gordon, Hunt, Cook, Fournette, Devonta Freeman, Jerick McKinnon. Followed up right with all these running backs. And I had to really think about what I wanted to do with Doug Baldwin. I'm exceptionally high on Baldwin this year. I think the Seattle's defense has got significantly worse. I just don't think by drafting Penny, their running game issues are solved. They might be down in games. They may have to throw as much. You lose Paul Richardson. You lose Jimmy Graham, especially with Jimmy Graham where he was such a red zone presence. And Luke Wilson's gone as well, and they replaced him with alligator arms Ed Dixon. That can't turn out well for any tight end numbers. And Doug Baldwin, before Jimmy Graham got there, was a very useful red zone target. He's not a gigantic body, but he's very swift and has a great first move. And he has that connection with Russell Wilson that really goes a long way. The trust is there with him, and this could just be such a high ceiling in terms of volume and in terms of targets that I would prefer to take him with the 3rd pick of the 3rd round, but if I'm on that swing, I'm probably going to take Doug Baldwin. Is that too high, the first pick of, let's say, the 2nd round, knowing that he's not getting back to me at the end of the 3rd?
Ooh, at like 2.01?
2.01, because he's not there at the 3.12.
Man, I mean, you know, I don't want to like discourage anybody from
No.
picking somebody that they really love,
You throw
you know?
you throw all the shade you want. This is what happened. I 2 years ago I had Mike Evans ranked inside my top 5. That worked out. Last year I had Bilal Powell inside the top 20. That was a horrendous pick. So it's either really right or really wrong with me.
No, I mean, I really like Doug Baldwin. I think he's actually my highest owned like player in the top 3 rounds of best ball drafts so far. And I really like him. I don't think I would take him at 2.01. You know, I think that there comes a point where you also have to examine the downside. You know, they went out and hired Brian Schottenheimer, like the most confusing coaching hire of the offseason, probably. And he wants to run the ball. And, you know, if Doug Baldwin doesn't end up getting all these targets that we anticipate, that could end up being a really back-breaking move there at the top of the second round. So I think it's just a little bit too aggressive. But I certainly am with you that I love Doug Baldwin. They are missing 37 red zone targets from last year in Paul Richardson and Jimmy Graham alone. You know, and I do think that they're ultimately, my expectation for them is that Brian Schottenheimer's, you know, negative expected value way of coaching offense combined with the decrease in defensive talent in Seattle is going to end up translating to a monster year for Doug Baldwin. So I'm hugely on him. I don't think I would take him over like Leonard Fournette at 2.01 or Melvin Gordon at 2.01. But certainly anytime that I'm drafting, you know, late in the second, he's on the radar. And whenever he is available in the very early third, he's right in the crosshairs.
Well, this goes back to where do you want to pick? Because I feel like I can construct, especially because Baldwin's that guy for me, that when I just look at the ADP and where I have him ranked, he's significantly higher. That if I picked at number 4 or number 3 or number 5, I would just have a much easier time building an overall better team, knowing that I would be able to get him into the third round as long as I picked at the top end of the third round. It's just I would feel that where I want him, he just wouldn't make it back to me back there. So this is where the ranking has to fall for him, for me, because like even to look at the other guys, like Devontae Adams, I was very close on. AJ Green, maybe I'm just, is AJ Green turning into the new Marvin Harrison, where at least every single person in your fantasy league has owned AJ Green at some point? It's always like, yeah, AJ Green's good, but I just want to try something new.
He's been kind of a boom bust performer week to week. You know, he's been an inconsistent guy week to week. His quarterback play is subpar. They don't give him a lot of high percentage targets. And last year his catch rate, I think it was around like 52% or something like that. And, you know, they don't have any other weapons to attract coverage. And, you know, when you're talking about, and I mean, you know, that means that he's going to have great target volume, but his efficiency is going to be down a little bit. You know, it doesn't look good for Tyler Eifert right now. John Ross, total wild card. You know, Brandon LaFell is a guy that they just keep trotting out there, and he just keeps getting worse and hurting the team. So their lack of alternative weapons, I think, winds up hurting AJ Green's, combined with the quarterback play, winds up hurting his efficiency. I think his targets are solidified, but I wish that they just had one more threat there to help him a little bit, because he has a lot of games where he's just inefficient in those games, and it's understandable because it's very clear that he's the most threatening player in the offense, and the defense knows that better than anyone.
So when you draft your teams, do you think about it from a consistency week-to-week basis? I'm talking about season-long, head-to-head format, not best ball, but when you're just playing someone in a head-to-head league. Are you shooting for these high upside guys that are incredibly volatile, incredibly risky, or do you like to build a team of guys that, hey, they have the solid floor every single week, and they do have upside to go along with it? Do you like to roll the dice a little bit and really try to blow everyone out in the league, or do you think that consistency works best?
I mean, weekly consistency and volatility, I think they come into play to some extent, but I think it's a little bit overblown, because a lot of the guys that we actually think of as consistent aren't quite as consistent as we think, especially at wide receiver. Wide receivers just in general are not consistent. Golden Tate, for instance, he seems like a guy who would be consistent week to week. And he actually has been very consistent year over year. He's got 90 plus catches in 4 straight years in Detroit. But he's actually, if you look at him from game to game, he's volatile week to week. Larry Fitz is a guy who seems like he profiles as consistent. He's been pretty volatile. His stats from year to year look consistent on a sheet of paper, but he had a bunch of blow up games last season and he combined them with duds. 2 years before that, he was fairly consistent early in the season, and then he had big drop offs later on in the season. And people thought that was because he was old, because that seems intuitive that he would wear down over the course of the year. But then last year he finished strong. So that was just our little small sample narrative from his age 32 and 33 seasons. Doug Baldwin is another guy who seems like he should be consistent, but he's been a spiked week receiver. So I do think it's a consideration, but I think that trying to weed out guys who we view as consistent can actually lead to making worse picks, especially when those guys aren't even really as consistent as we think. Again, the wide receiver position in general is just inconsistent because these guys have to get by on 9 to 11 targets per game, and they have to catch a lot of those to hit in that particular game. Whereas with a top tier running back, you're talking about these guys can get 20 plus carries and 3 to 5 targets per week, and even in down weeks, they're getting 12 to 17 carries and maybe even more targets because their team is playing from behind. So the running backs offer so much more consistency. The wide receiver position is just inconsistent in general.
So when I think about, you talked about range of outcomes earlier, like what is the floor for this player? What's the ceiling for this player? What's the downside? What's the upside? I can't wrap my mind around Jerick McKinnon. I realize where the upside comes in, but I'm still not certain that he can play all 3 downs. Maybe it's a size thing. I don't know what it is. It's hard for me to envision it. It's a lot like when I look down the list. I know that there's more risk that is inherently with like someone like Kenyon Drake. But I feel like if everything breaks right for Kenyon Drake, he could be a top 10 running back this season. The same thing for Jerick McKinnon. Now, on paper, it looks like Jerick McKinnon's in a better offense, and they can utilize him well with a head coach who knows how to properly use running backs. But if he ends up just playing a role in this offense where someone like Kenyon Drake can end up becoming the workhorse, and let's say he can stave off the ageless Frank Gore and he doesn't end up in a running back by committee, which it looks like he could be slated for right now. This is why rankings will adjust with training camp. Is there that much of a difference between the two in what their ceilings are and what their floors are, or would you think that Jerick is more consistent?
Well, I think this, just speaking about Jerick McKinnon specifically, you begin with this situation. You look at the history of the Shanahan running games. Terrell Davis, Clinton Portis, Arian Foster, Alfred Morris. Guys that have consistently produced above their heads, or above expectation, and that is what you would be expecting from Jerick McKinnon. The 49ers were very aggressive in going out and getting him. They made him the 5th highest paid running back in the league. And the beat writers say they plan to use him in the Devontae Freeman role. They poured resources into their offensive line in free agency in the draft. They took Mike McGlinchey with the number 9 overall pick. They signed Weston Richburg to play center. And with Jimmy Garoppolo at quarterback, I think that they have a chance to field a pretty high-powered offense. So, look, I think that you just have to understand what you're getting into with Jerick McKinnon. He has never shown that he can produce at a high-end RB1 level for a sustained period, for a full season. He's shown us flashes, but he's never proven it, and that's why he is not a first-round pick. He is a late 2 to early 3 to mid 3 because of his situation and the confidence that the 49ers showed in him and what they are able to, the offense that they're able to drop him into with the improved offensive line, with a pretty good, pretty promising quarterback play in a proven running system. So I just think you have to understand what you're getting into. He's far from a lock, but I think that his upside does warrant his average draft position right now.
So, I think he's being properly drafted as well, but then I start to see some of the other names that come right behind him at running back, at least in my rankings. So at 25, I have Kenyon Drake. I'm willing to gamble on him. He's going a little bit later than this. He's someone that can slip down in drafts that you could potentially get a workhorse back. Or you have someone who, skill-wise, he was very good when handed over the lead back role. I just don't know if Adam Gase really wants to go down that route, but hopefully that the skill can overcome it and he can garner 65% of the snaps, potentially 70% of the snaps, get involved in the passing game, and I think there's upside to be mined there. But I looked right after him, then I go Christian McCaffrey is 28 on this list, LaShawn McCoy, and then Alex Collins, who I really, really like here. He's someone who I just think is completely undervalued just because no one wants anything to do with the Ravens offense. But what should really change in Baltimore? Are people really sweating Kenneth Dixon that much?
They shouldn't be. Kenneth Dixon missed all of last year with substance abuse and PED suspensions. The history of guys who, have suspensions like that and then returning to be effective or returning at all is slim to none. We saw what happened with, the latest example would be like Martavis Bryant. Hopefully Josh Gordon. I'm optimistic that Josh Gordon can bounce back from that. But Kenneth Dixon also missed time with a severe knee injury. That was actually the reason that he missed the season. So it wasn't even the suspensions. He was able to serve those suspensions while he was on injured reserve. So he's got a bunch of red flags. I'm big on Alex Collins. I've been hammering him in the fourth round of best ball drafts. His rushing success rate last year ranked 8th among 47 qualified running backs at Football Outsiders. He was ahead of Devontae Freeman, Le'Veon Bell, and Mark Ingram in that statistic. He averaged 19.2 touches per game from week 8 on. And he became the centerpiece of the offense for a team that finished 5-2 after its bye week in week 10. They hitched their offense to him. Joe Flacco was struggling, and Alex Collins became the centerpiece of their offense. And he had this success running behind the most injured offensive line in the NFL last year. And this year they get back both of their guards. Alex Lewis missed all of last season with a shoulder injury. Marshall Yanda missed almost all of the season with an ankle injury. Combined, they missed 30 games. I know in Warren Sharp's strength of schedule, the Ravens this year have the 10th softest run defense schedule in the league. And then if we get a transition from Joe Flacco to Lamar Jackson at some point, whether it be, we get surprised and Lamar Jackson is the week 1 starter, or Joe Flacco struggles in the first month and the locker room is like, hey, we got to go to Lamar. Because we've already heard the veterans on the Ravens come out and say how much they love and they've just been mesmerized by Lamar Jackson on the practice field. If we get that transition, this offense becomes extremely run heavy. I think that they become a candidate to lead the NFL in rushing attempts. They have a good defense to keep them in those run-friendly scripts. And that threat of Lamar Jackson out there, they could have a really dynamic running game. So I like the floor on Alex Collins, and I really like the ceiling, and he's one of my favorite fourth-round picks right now.
So if we were just kind of to base it on where guys are going ADP-wise, round 3, it sounds like you're in on Doug Baldwin as a third-round pick, Alex Collins as a fourth-round pick. What would be your ideal start with those two guys? It would have to be, Gurley, and then who would be selected now? I guess, are you a Team Julio guy, or are you a Never Julio guy?
No, I'm definitely Team Julio. I think Gronk would kind of make sense there. So Gurley kind of at the top, Gronk, at 2.9, and then come back around, or 2.8 or something like that. Come back around, Doug Baldwin at 3.4. My math is probably terribly off here, but and then Alex Collins in the middle fourth. I would love that start.
Yeah, that's a pretty solid start. I don't worry about Gronk, but I can see the Patriots, just once again, a product of playing in their division as well, is that they don't have the stiffest competition coming up on their schedule. I can just see them almost treading water for as long as possible and not deploying the entire offense. If they try to get up, or if they don't need to utilize Gronk that much, and they might have to with Edelman being suspended and a total lack of receiving options. I can see the path, and I can see the writing to where Gronk just absolutely goes bananas this season, but I think they just might want to conserve him for the playoffs. Does that worry you at all?
That bubble wrap Gronk theory?
Yeah.
That's been, kind of bantied about at times, and there have been kind of like games where people are like, oh, bubble wrap Gronk, there it was. But it's never really held for a lengthy stretch. I think that if you're thinking about ceiling, Gronk's ceiling is about as high as any players in the league. He has like 15 touchdowns in his range of potential outcomes. His draft cost isn't too bad this year, usually late second. You have no Edelman for the first 4 games. Brandon Cooks is gone. Is Edelman going to be the same guy when he comes back? He's old, coming off a torn ACL. And they are missing like the 5th most targets in the NFL from last year's roster. So I just think that the ceiling is really, really big. I am a pro Gronk guy. At that in that late second, that mid to late second, you could think about Devontae Adams. We could talk about AJ Green, but I think that Gronk is definitely worth consideration.
He also seems like a game breaker too in terms of your league. If you get the good Gronk season and he is the number 1 tight end and does Gronk things, your path to a fantasy championship has to go exponentially up versus having, let's say you draft Devontae Adams, but then you get, I don't know, Stefan Diggs in the 3rd round. Like, the difference between those two may not be quite as pronounced as Gronk and whoever your opponent has at tight end too.
Yeah, no question. There are, 7 or 8 guys that we think of as candidates to lead the NFL in touchdowns, and Rob Gronkowski is squarely in that mix.
So for the rest of my bottom 20 here, I have like T.Y. Hilton. I actually have Diggs over Thielen. For this particular one, I like both of them, obviously. There's not really much to hate about the Minnesota offense, although you have a new OC in there right now. So do you have any hesitation about either Dalvin Cook, Adam Thielen, Stefan Diggs, or Kyle Rudolph?
I think that your concern begins with the volume in the passing offense, because I think, this is this team, even after losing their stud running back, ranked 2nd in the NFL in rushing attempts last year. And Kirk Cousins has been a pretty high volume passer in Washington, top 12, top 8 every year in terms of pass attempts. And I think that his volume is going to go down in Minnesota. So they have to be able to compensate with efficiency. Now, Kirk Cousins has been super, super efficient, and he is now surrounded by guys who have been super, super efficient with their targets in Thielen and Diggs, and Kyle Rudolph has been super efficient in the red zone. I've been drafting a lot of these guys. Kirk Cousins usually goes a round or 2 ahead of where I'm taking quarterbacks. But, sometimes I think about him in the 10th when he gets to the 10th. Kyle Rudolph, he goes 8th, 9th round. He's the last of the true, I think relatively confident tight end ones. And then Adam Thielen and Stefan Diggs. Adam Thielen, especially for his floor, and Stefan Diggs, I think he has a monster ceiling. I don't think we've seen the best of Stefan Diggs. Go back and look at his statistics the last 2 seasons before he suffered a groin injury, like in the 4th and 5th weeks of the year. And he's like producing like Antonio Brown. And that's what he looks like as a player when you watch him. He's, I think, the closest player that we have in the NFL to having that skill set of Antonio Brown. He hasn't totally put it all together yet, has not reached 1,000 yards in a season yet, but I think it's coming. He's still a really, really young player. And I think that we have not seen the best of him yet.
So Gronk you can go inside the first 2 rounds with. Then you have Ertz and you have Kelce, and they seem to be on a tier by themselves. I have Ertz and Kelce back-to-back in my overall rankings. Kelce is 31. Zach Ertz is number 32. I think that when we talk about consistency versus floor, we've seen the consistency with Travis Kelce over the past 2 seasons. Zach Ertz just seems like the ultimate floor-type player, where you put a new quarterback in Kansas City. You add Sammy Watkins to the mix as well, and on a defense that frankly probably isn't going to be very good, that maybe you increase these pass attempts. But I would be willing to take the upside of Kelce versus the potential downside coming with a new quarterback that maybe for whatever reason Patrick Mahomes just isn't a big Travis Kelce fan. I happen to think he's going to make Travis Kelce better, but is this a situation where you would lean towards safety, or do you roll the dice on how good Kelce could be, and potentially he's closer to Gronk than he is to Ertz by season's end?
Yeah, I have the exact same top 3 tight ends as you do, but I have more separation between Kelce and Ertz than you do. Kelce's just a much better player than Zach Ertz. Zach Ertz, we did see. So if you just look at his counting stats over the last 3 seasons, they're pretty much all the same in catches and yards. It's 70 to 78 catches, 800 to 840 yards. And all of a sudden last year, the touchdown spiked. And that's what put him over the top. He had never really been a big touchdown scorer before that. Even go back and look at Stanford. He didn't have big touchdown numbers at Stanford. But Carson Wentz had a great year. He had a crazy touchdown rate. He had one of the best touchdown rates in the NFL. And Zach Ertz really felt the positive end of variance, accompanied by Carson Wentz's breakout touchdown rate. Will that hold? My guess is no. Quarterbacks struggle to carry over astronomical touchdown rates into the following season. With Travis Kelce, I do expect a little bit more weekly volatility. He's been a very consistent producer over the last couple of years. He's finished first and second among tight ends and catches. I think he has had over 80 receptions in both of those years. And this team looks like it's going to be throwing Patrick Mahomes back into the Big 12 because, first of all, they used a ton of spread concepts last year. That kind of suits, it should suit his comfort level. They used a ton of shotgun. They were a 76% shotgun team. And as you mentioned, their defense looks like a Big 12 defense. I mean, the defense could be legit bad. It was bad last year. To be perfectly frank. And now they're counting on Eric Berry to come back from a torn Achilles. Are we going to see the same Eric Berry? They got rid of Marcus Peters. They did acquire Kendall Fuller. He's a slot corner. And it looks like they're going to try to play him at outside corner this year. The pass rush beyond Justin Houston has been disappointing. And even Justin Houston himself has struggled with injuries and been inconsistent up front. They got gashed by the run last season. I'm not sure they're going to be a whole lot better in that area. They're going to have to score points, man, and they're going to spread it out. And that's why they went and invested in Sammy Watkins. And that's why they got rid of Alex Smith for a pretty, Redskins got him for a pretty economical price because they want to continue to push their offense forward. And they think that Patrick Mahomes gives them the best chance to do that. I agree with you though that is the chemistry going to be there? Chemistry with a quarterback is a very real thing. Is that going to be there? And are the targets going to go down because of the addition of Sammy Watkins, or will they be offset by the fact that the Chiefs are just going to have to throw the ball more than they usually do because their defense is going to be bad? But I just think that Travis Kelce at the end of the day is a much better player than Zach Ertz. And so that's why I have him, a little bit more separation than you do between those two tight ends.
Yeah, maybe there's something with me when it comes to tight end. Like even when I get down lower in my tight end rankings, like I have Delaney Walker over Jimmy Graham. And most people would probably call that ludicrous. I just know what I'm getting from Delaney Walker. And I know that I always get him at a good price. Where do I have old Delaney coming in here? He's way down on the list somewhere. Let's see. Jimmy Graham I have at 86. And Delaney Walker I have grouped with Greg Olsen at 64 and number 65. So I'm just higher on that week-to-week consistency from tight end. Like Jimmy Graham, it feels to me if things go right, he can be an absolute monster who wins you weeks. But at his downside, I still think he's going to score touchdowns. But there might not be a whole lot there for 11 weeks of the season, and then you're basically a zero with him. And I don't like that. Now, I think that that's a more extreme example of what we're talking about. I think that both Kelce and Ertz are good plays, but the reason I have them grouped so closely is because that floor with me at tight end with Zach Ertz, I think is very, very valuable in terms of PPR rankings, that I can get my 10 points per week, my 12 points per week, and just be on my way. And I'm never dealing with the circumstance where I need one catch for a touchdown and just pray that happens. And even so, that still might not be as good as 7 catches for 70 yards.
Yeah, fair enough. I mean, I have Jimmy Graham ahead of Delaney Walker just for the sheer touchdown upside playing with Aaron Rodgers. And he's going to be such a great red zone target. And the Packers throw the ball in the red zone at one of the highest clips in the league. In his last full season with Aaron Rodgers healthy, the Packers threw the ball on 67% of their red zone plays, third most in the league. And then Jimmy Graham is just such a great complement for that, I think. And he has, a 12 touchdown ceiling. And Delaney Walker has never really been a big touchdown guy, but Delaney Walker is my highest owned tight end because I love the value at which I can get him. I'll take him almost every time in the late 6th and certainly every time anywhere in the 7th round. I mean, he's my favorite 7th round pick right now.
All right, before we get into quarterbacks, I did want to ask you about this very confusing tier of receivers that I frankly just really struggled to rank. You got some, very, very, high air yards guys, really breakout players, just very volatile players, some very consistent players, older players, younger players. It goes. Starting at number 33, Larry Fitzgerald, Juju Smith-Schuster, Allen Robinson, Demaryius Thomas, Amari Cooper, Chris Hogan, who I vaulted up to number 38 because I own tons of shares of Chris Hogan now, Marvin Jones, who I have substantially higher than Golden Tate, Josh Gordon, Alshon Jeffrey, and Tyreek Hill. Tyreek Hill is the one I'm most worried about, but I can't overlook the upside that he can bring to an offense. I have more faith in Kelce, but I think with Sammy Watkins there, and it's almost like the Jimmy Graham thing where I think I'd rather just take a safer tight end and just take Randall Cobb a bit later. I want exposure to that offense, but I always kind of want to get the cheapest value. And this seems like the first time in forever that people are off Sammy Watkins. He's going in like the late 7th, early 8th round. I think that's a better pick than Tyreek Hill in the 3rd.
Yeah, that's fair. Sammy Watkins has started to creep up on draft. He was a guy that I was hammering for a while in that 7th and 8th round range that you were talking about. I can't get him anymore, man. I mean, he's starting to go in the 5th and 6th. I think that people have kind of caught on to this notion that he is a good investment. This is one of his lowest ADPs in years, and it might be the lowest ADP of his entire career. And he's on this team that is going to have to throw the ball around the yard. The player that you mentioned in that cluster that I'm fading is Allen Robinson. People really want him to happen this year. We have not seen Allen Robinson play good football since 2015. He was one of the most inefficient receivers in the league in 2016. And then last year he lasted 3 snaps, tore his ACL. In OTAs and minicamp, he barely did anything out on the field. The Bears were like telling us that the reason they couldn't retain Cameron Meredith was because of his knee injury. And, they go sign their receiver coming off a knee injury, and Cameron Meredith is doing more in OTAs and minicamp than Allen Robinson is doing at Bears OTAs and minicamp. Maybe they're just easing him in. But another thing that I noticed about Mitchell Trubisky, at least as a rookie, is he was such a better passer in the middle of the field, throwing to the middle of the field. And look, it's that could be very much skewed by the personnel that was on the outside in Chicago, which was abysmal. But the personnel in the middle of the field wasn't great either. Kendall Wright's okay, but he's also a guy who's like playing for the league minimum this year on the Vikings, just trying to make their team.
Oh, one second. Does Kendall Wright pose the biggest threat to Adam Thielen's numbers this year if he wins that job and plays the slot?
That was my initial take, but then I went and looked at Adam Thielen's efficiency on outside the numbers routes, and he was actually more efficient in terms of like yards per target and yards per route run on the perimeter. He was winning on the outside. And even in that playoff game where the Saints shadowed him with Marshawn Lattimore, which goes to show you how much respect the Saints and NFL defensive coordinators have for Adam Thielen. They shadowed him and not Stephon Diggs with their top cornerback. He had a pretty good game, made plays against Marshawn Lattimore. I think that at the end of the day, Kendall Wright is going to be the Vikings' third receiver because he's better than Laquan Treadwell, and he's going to play in the slot. And Thielen's still going to play in the slot some, but I think his slot rate is probably going to go down, and we're going to see him outside more, but I think he's going to be just fine. But bringing it back to Allen Robinson, he has so many red flags. First of all, the track record of free agent wide receivers is not very good moving on to their new teams. And again, we have not seen him play well in a pretty long time. And he's coming off the knee injury, and he's going to this quarterback who was so much better throwing in the middle of the field. And I know I mentioned the Bears last year. Even before that at North Carolina, Mitchell Trubisky's go-to guy there was Ryan Switzer, who was a slot receiver. And the guys on the outside there were not putting up big numbers. Matt Collins, 4th-round pick in the NFL, was not putting up big numbers with Mitchell Trubisky. So I like the guys in the middle of the field for the Bears. Anthony Miller really late, and Trey Burton in the middle rounds.
Well, it seems like Trey Burton is just going to not necessarily play tight end in the traditional sense,
Right.
and he'll just split out to the slot and just run the majority of routes from there, won't he?
Yeah, he ran 52% of his routes in the slot in Philadelphia. And last year, Travis Kelce under Matt Nagy, now the Bears head coach, Travis Kelce last year set a career high in slot routes run at 49%. And I think that Trey Burton will run, 55 to maybe even 60% of his routes in the slot. They're going to be a spread team. The Bears are going to be a spread team. Their offensive coordinator is friggin' Mark Helfrich from Oregon. They are, and it's going to be Trey Burton and Anthony Miller as their two slots, and it's going to be Taylor Gabriel and Allen Robinson on the outside.
I always do like the sledgehammer, Taylor Gabriel. You can just get, not necessarily for fantasy, but I like watching him. He's so fast and he's so little, so fast, and just gets behind defenses. Even when he was in Cleveland, he was still pretty good. So I actually have Trey Burton ranked at 88. He's on that tier with Jimmy Graham, Evan Engram, Trey Burton, and Kyle Rudolph. Evan Engram I found really tough because the athleticism is there. Yeah, I just don't know how he fits into this Giants offense now that Beckham's back and Sterling Shepard isn't hurt and Brandon Marshall goes out right away, that he was the de facto number one guy on this team. And now in the pecking order, he's at best 3rd, maybe 4th behind Shepard?
Yeah, I mean, he was 2nd in the NFL among tight ends and targets last year. And he ain't getting close to that this year with Odell Beckham back and Sterling Shepard back. And I mean, he just benefited from a lot of opportunity. He was actually very inefficient. I mean, his catch rate was bad. Josh Hermsmeyer has been doing game speed work and using next gen stats. And I was shocked to see that Evan Ingram's game speed was barely better than Antonio Gates last year. Now he's a rookie, and maybe he's not playing as fast as. He's thinking a lot. A lot of responsibility was put on his plate, but I was very surprised that his game speed was so low. I mean, it was well below NFL average among tight ends, and this guy was a 93rd percentile spark athlete coming out of Ole Miss. You need him to be more efficient, much more efficient than he was last year, because he's going to lose 30 targets from last season.
Well, I'm going to need you to help me out here because I think I need to move Evan Engram down a little bit. Would you go Evan Engram or Trey Burton?
I have Evan Engram above Trey Burton because the first place that I start is just that we've seen Evan Engram have a big season in the NFL. And I mean, I know I just kind of downplayed him, but he did have a big season. I mean, he was a top 5 fantasy tight end as a rookie. And we've never seen that from Trey Burton. We've seen flashes. Whenever Zach Ertz has been out, Trey Burton was a plug and play. But he wasn't productive in college. He had 4 receiving touchdowns in his college career. I realized he played quarterback part of the time at Florida, or at least he was recruited there as a quarterback. But we've never seen him have a big NFL season. There is a great picture that you can paint for Trey Burton. And I think I have him right behind Evan Engram right now. I have Kyle Rudolph ahead of Trey Burton. And then I have, Trey Burton is tight end 9, I want to say. I have Evan Engram because he's shown it to us before.
So Evan Engram, Trey Burton, Kyle Rudolph, I have back, 87, 88, 89, and I put Jordan Reed on that tier. Am I just foolish for thinking that Jordan Reed can still happen?
It's a tough one, man. I mean, the guy has 6 concussions in the NFL. I can just see a scenario where he suffers a concussion he shows up to training camp. They're taking it easy on him, and He's working off to the side with the trainers. They keep him out of team drills, and he like gets hit in the head with a football, and he gets like another concussion, and then he retires. It's not out of the question that this guy could retire at some point. It may even be a smart move for him. His body just has not shown us, he has not shown that his body can hold up to a consistent NFL season. And at the same time, like, his price is intriguing. When he makes it into the 10th round, I'm willing to pull the trigger on him. In terms of his ranking, I think I have him right about where you have him. But I never, you never have confidence when you're drafting Jordan Reed, even when he falls to the 10th round.
Do you have any tight ends let's say you punt on tight end and you wait to the very end? I know some people do it with quarterback. Some people, if they just don't feel there's value there for tight end, they do the same thing. It's not a big strategy I like to play, but it seems like George Kittle is being talked up a lot, but I like Vance McDonald. I know he's, at best, probably the 4th option in Pittsburgh, but I really did like what I saw from him down the stretch and into the playoffs last season. It seems like the other teams know they have to take care of Bell. They know they have to take care of Antonio Brown. When Juju became a thing, teams really had to focus on him. And Vance McDonald's basically standing 8 yards wide open over the center of the field, just being like, hey, throw it to me. And eventually Ben just takes the path of least resistance.
Yeah, McDonald was hurt a lot last year. He battled like a recurring knee injury. When he was healthy, he was their primary receiving tight end, not Jesse James. Jesse James would be the guy that they would stick on the line and be their 6 offensive linemen. Vance McDonald was the guy running routes. So I do like him at the end of the draft. I do like Ricky Seals-Jones at the end of drafts. There's a ton of opportunity in Arizona. You have Larry Fitzgerald. He's going to soak up targets. You have David Johnson, but then it's wide open after that. And it's Christian Kirk and it's Ricky Seals-Jones. And you have a passer in Sam Bradford who has always been much better targeting in the middle of the field. And that's where Ricky Seals-Jones is going to run most of his routes. And I think that Josh Rosen will end up targeting the middle of the field most too, if and when he gets in there. And hey, he may start in week 1, but their offensive line is so bad. They are going to need to get the ball out of their quarterback's hands quickly, and into the middle of the field on higher percentage routes. And Ricky Seals-Jones, he showed some big playability last year. This dude played wideout at Texas A&M. Another guy who's kind of on the radar is Austin Hooper. Was a little bit of a disappointment last year, but I think that he's a guy who could score 6 or 7 touchdowns. And if he were to do something like that, he'd just crush his ADP.
Do you think that the Atlanta offense is just due for a positive regression in terms of how they should have scored last season and just frankly didn't?
Absolutely. And we saw the same dynamic in the first year of Kyle Shanahan. I'm not saying that Steve Sarkisian is as good as Kyle Shanahan, but we saw that same dynamic where they really struggled in the red zone in the first year under Shanahan. And last year they were 3rd in yards per play and 3rd in yards per drive. They moved the ball pretty efficiently, but the best fantasy player on the team was like Matt Bryant, because they nailed so many field goals. Julio had 3 touchdowns, only scored in 2 games all year. Matt Ryan's touchdown rate was almost sawed in half from his monster MVP season. I mean, his touchdown rate went from 7.1 to 3.8. And then, they're absolutely primed for positive touchdown regression. They can go back and look at the mistakes that they made in scoring position, hopefully learn from them and score more. They should have a very good offense, man. I mean, adding Calvin Ridley, their 3 receiver package is going to be better. I think Austin Hooper has that potential to take a 3rd-year leap. Julio is going to score more. Matt Ryan is going to score more, throw more touchdown passes, and they have a good offensive line. I mean, I think that they're an offense to buy. I've been buying a lot of Matt Ryan, Austin Hooper, and even some Mohamed Sanu just because he ends up going like in the 16th round of best ball drafts.
I go Amari Cooper, Chris Hogan, Marvin Jones, and Josh Gordon. But the 2 that I want to point out really are Hogan and Josh Gordon. I just think that we've talked about the Patriots offense enough that there's a dearth of talent at the receiving position. Hey, maybe for the first 4 weeks, Jordan Matthews is the guy you want to play at $3,200 on DraftKings and plug him in if you just play in a 16-team league. But it seems like Chris Hogan, if he can stay healthy, could have an absolutely gigantic season in New England. And you get him at a much cheaper value right now than someone like, let's say, Gronk. You get him, well, I mean, he's been going up, but not quite as much as I thought he would post Edelman's suspension. So does Chris Hogan have a better chance of outscoring Josh Gordon? Because I think he does.
That's tough to say. I mean, Josh Gordon, when he came back, he looked really good in the final 5 games. He was playing with, maybe one of the most inaccurate quarterbacks in football last year, and he still flashed. I mean, he still gave us a couple of big games down the stretch. He was clearly getting open. Again, going back to his game speed data, he was pretty much all the way back. He is a true physical freak. He has a lot of trust issues. And I think that the floor on Chris Hogan is much stronger. I'm a huge Chris Hogan guy. I traded a late first-round dynasty pick for him last offseason, put it on Twitter, just got crushed for it. And, in the first 8 games, he was like the overall wide receiver 3. He had 5 touchdowns in the first 5 games. He's got 19 targets inside the 10-yard line to Gronk's 13 over the last 2 seasons. Brady looks for him in the red zone. He did get hurt. And then when he came back, hey, did you see what he did in the Super Bowl? 6 for 128 and a touchdown on 8 targets against the Eagles. Dude can play, and dude has chemistry with Tom Brady, and we're going to see him run higher percentage routes in the slot, I think, early in the season without Edelman. And again, what are we going to get from Edelman? And is it possible that Gronk gets hurt? Absolutely. And, Chris Hogan is absolutely, I'm with you, primed for a great, great year. And I'm excited about having given up that first-round dynasty pick for him at this point.
I just don't know what to do with the Cleveland offense, whether it's the backfield. I don't know if I should be drafting none of them, if I should be taking Chubb later on than Hyde, or, hey, maybe Hyde just turns out to be their starter and he's really good. Is it Jarvis Landry? Is David Njoku like a legitimate sleeper? Is Josh Gordon all the way back? Like, is Tyrod Taylor going to be a good pick? Is he even going to start by the time that week 4 comes around? I just feel there are so many question marks around the Browns offense, and everyone just wants to believe that they're going to be good, but it's almost like you talked about when you have the rookies, that sometimes you just kind of need to see it from the other guy who's done it first, so you put him higher. I kind of need to see it from the Browns. I'm willing to be wrong on the Browns offense rather than just kind of push all in on them and just expect things to change all of a sudden.
Oh, yeah, I don't think anybody should be pushing their chips in on the Browns offense. But, from the passing game standpoint, how much volume are we going to get? Tyrod Taylor, when he was the quarterback for the Bills, 3 seasons, they finished 31st, and 32nd in the NFL in pass attempts. And, I think he's going to throw more in Cleveland, but Jarvis Landry has been a guy who's been very reliant on volume. I mean, he doesn't average big yards per catch. He'd never been much of a touchdown scorer before last year. Jarvis Landry is almost in that Mark Ingram full fade for me at this point. He's a guy who could go from catching, 112 passes to like 80. And what happens then? He's not helping you. If he catches 80 balls, what is he going to give us? 850 yards and, 4 touchdowns? Like, no way am I taking him, around his wide receiver 20 ADP. I mean, he's not even in the mix. I have him like in the mid 30s among wide receivers. The guy who I do think can be, can complement Tyrod Taylor's passing style the best is Josh Gordon, because of his big play ability, because when Tyrod Taylor has been surrounded with guys who can make plays downfield, that's when Tyrod Taylor has been at his best as a passer. And really, is this the best quarterback of Josh Gordon's career? Because this dude's had to play with Brandon Weeden and, Brian Hoyer. I mean, Brian Hoyer would be in the mix for the best quarterback of Josh Gordon's career. Deshaun Kaiser, it would probably be between Tyrod Taylor and Brian Hoyer.
All right, so the final RB tier that I want to talk about here is I have Gentleman Joe Mixon at number 43, Jordan Howard at 44, Marshawn Lynch at 45, Rex Burkhead at number 46, Lamar Miller and Rashad Penny at number 48. And I do want to throw Geis into this mix too, along with Sony Michel, who I have just a little bit lower. I'm worried with Chris Thompson as it pertains to Geis and just being on the field all that often, especially if the Redskins have to throw a lot, potentially. We'll see about that, but I'm down on Jordan Howard. I've kind of spelled this out over and over, but I know that you're a little bit higher on him, potentially with Mitch Trubisky playing more more out of shotgun now that Nagy's around and Jordan Howard having so much success running out of the shotgun formation. I still just worry that this offense isn't going to be incredibly good. Yes, he might be the goal line back, but how much scoring opportunity is there going to be? I feel like he's going to need to volume you to death on the ground. And if Tariq Cohen does continue to catch passes out of the backfield, almost like we saw mid-season between Kareem Hunt and Charkandrick West, but in a more pronounced role for Tariq Cohen, because Jordan Howard has legit hands of stone, that I just don't know where the upside comes in. I'd rather roll the dice on someone like Alex Collins, who could just be around and potentially get himself more involved in the passing game while continues to sustain all the giant workload he has on the ground.
Yeah, the main fallout as it pertains to Jordan Howard as you mentioned, like how the Bears use shotgun at the lowest rate in the NFL last year. Well, first of all, Jordan Howard averages 6.5 yards per carry on shotgun runs and 4 yards per carry from under center. So that's a huge gap. But where it also comes into play is in terms of facing defenses with 8 or more defenders in the box. And Jordan Howard last year, running from under center so much, faced 8+ defenders in the box on 43% of his carries, 6th most among running backs with at least 150 rushing attempts. You can't play him in the passing game at this point. His 14 drop passes over the last 2 years. I know we say that drop passes are kind of overrated. That's the case for wide receivers. That's not the case for running backs. These are supposed to be high efficiency, high percentage plays. You cannot have your running back dropping passes all over the place. So that's going to really hurt his consistency. That's always going to be a concern for Jordan Howard. Last year, he totaled 80 yards or fewer in 11 of 16 games. And you have Tariq Cohen there. You even have Benny Cunningham there, who can function in the passing game and who they will use in the passing game or over Jordan Howard. Where I want Jordan Howard is in best ball. I do not want him on my season-long fantasy team. I think he's going to have multiple TD games, but then he's going to have these total dud games when the Bears fall behind, and he's going to crush your weeks when that happens. So I want his touchdown upside on my best ball roster. I don't think I'm going to take any of him in redraft, and he probably belongs in the 4th or 5th round in a PPR redraft season long.
All right, so I have Lynch and Burkhead pretty high here at number 45 and number 46. They're going way later than that. The whole Lynch thing was, I actually thought he was pretty good last year, and now with Gruden coming in, I don't have a whole lot of faith in Gruden to really be an exceptional coach in 2018. But I feel like unless he's just so in love with Doug Martin, and Doug Martin sucks, so he really shouldn't be, but Marshawn Lynch could average almost like what we're seeing, what people want Jordan Howard to be, and getting 23, 25 carries a game. I feel like that could be Marshawn Lynch this year.
I think that he deserves it. In the first 9 games last year, he averaged 11 touches per game. And then they started giving him the rock, and he averaged over the final 7 games, he averaged 4.7 yards per carry, and he averaged almost 100 total yards per game. He was the best player on their offense last year. And they didn't want to give him the rock for whatever reason early in the season, because they had some silly philosophy that, we're going to be a high explosive passing team, and then we're going to kind of ease our way into becoming a running team down the stretch. And none of that panned out. What an awful plan. It was a terrible plan to begin with. But he showed that he could still play, and he kept getting better as the season progressed. But the other night I was talking to this Raiders beat writer who's awesome, one of the best beat writers in the nation. And he's like, they genuinely love Doug Martin. Last year, Pro Football Focus, 53 running backs qualified for their elusive rating. Marshawn Lynch was number 7 among those 53. Guess where Doug Martin was?
I'm going to guess that he was somehow came 57th of 53.
He was 53rd. But, this guy he's been bad in 4 of the last 5 years. He hasn't cracked 3 yards per carry in back-to-back years. He's never been good in the passing game. He's always been a terrible pass blocker. it's kind of sad if they end up pulling carries away from Marshawn Lynch, who was super, super effective in the second half of last season, in favor of this guy who can't play.
So Burkhead, I have one spot after him. It's more of his Swiss Army knife type role, in this being PPR setting, that there's a chance that, hey, if Julian Edelman's out, screw Jordan Matthews, let's play Rex Burkhead in the slot. They seem to have no problems with that. Plus, you lose Amendola, so there's targets to go around. He's a more effective out-of-the-backfield pass catcher than James White is. Not to say that James White's not going to do anything. He will. He's James White. He'll just pop up 4 times a year and have 9 catches in that game. But it's the red zone usage for Rex Burkhead, which I just find astonishing. And I don't think that Sony Michel just comes in and they're just like, hey, Rex Burkhead, head to the bench. They just signed him to relatively big money for Rex Burkhead. I think he's going to have a substantial role in the Patriots offense.
Oh, I think he's going to have a huge role. I think he's going to be their week 1 starter. And I know that they use the first round pick on Sony Michel, but that doesn't necessarily mean he's going to be their week 1 starter. And if he fumbles like he did at one of the highest rates in college football, he had 12 fumbles at Georgia. We're not going to see much of Sony Michel in 2018, And I mean, that's not to say that Sony Michel is like a bad pick necessarily. I think that he starts to come into play in the 5th round, and I've taken my fair share of him. But I don't like to draft him without drafting Rex Burkhead on the same team. The Patriots love Rex Burkhead, man. They re-signed him after the season to a 3-year, $10 million deal. He scored 8 touchdowns in 10 games. If he hadn't gotten hurt, his ADP would be so much higher. I mean, and I know that, people say, oh, the best like recency bias to prey on is the injury bias, especially for a guy that really had never been hurt in the NFL before that. But Rex Burkhead comes right in, immediately overtakes Mike Gillislee to be the short, or I guess it took him a couple weeks, but he overtakes Mike Gillislee, who cost them a lot more to acquire. Mike Gillislee cost them a 5th round pick and a bigger contract to acquire than Rex Burkhead last year. So he overtakes him for that short yardage role. He outplays James White in the passing game, over 7 yards per target. James White was under 6 yards per target. You look at running backs who drew at least 30 targets last year. Only Alvin Kamara averaged more yards per route run than Rex Burkhead. He ran a pass route on 52% of his snaps last year, which is astronomical for a running back. And as you mentioned, he can line up in the slot. We could easily see him playing a bunch in the slot during Julian Edelman's suspension. And Danny Amendola is gone as well. So yeah, Rex Burkhead is another one of these guys that I'm taking whenever I possibly can. I'm willing to take him in the 5th round. If I don't like any other picks that are available there, I'm pushing the button on Rex Burkhead in the 5th round, and I'll definitely take him in the 6th pretty much every time.
So if you like Collins and you like Burkhead, can you ever see a path where you end up drafting receiver, Gronk, receiver, Collins, Burkhead, and that's the start of your team?
Receiver, Gronk, receiver, Collins, Burkhead.
If that was your first 5 picks, how okay would you be with that as a start?
Yeah, I think it would be fine. I mean, I think that you are embracing a decent amount of risk. You have the risk with Gronk because he is at an elevated injury risk. That things may not go as we expect. We talk about guys like, you can talk about them from a glass half full or a glass half empty standpoint. And when I see guys that have more positive factors working in their favor, like Burkhead and Alex Collins, I tend to talk about them more from a glass half full standpoint. But these guys also do have floors, or they have lower floors. We haven't seen Alex Collins do it for a full season. We certainly haven't seen Rex Burkhead do it for a full season. But I do like the value of Alex Collins in the 4th and Rex Burkhead in the 6th.
All right, so finally, quarterbacks. It's a hotly debated thing. JJ Zacharyson would be like, hey, just take one in the last round. And generally, I end up just taking someone in like the 13th round, 14th round. But this year, I feel like Russell Wilson's going to be really good. So I have Russell Wilson ranked number 49th. I have Aaron Rodgers ranked number 50th. The next tier of receiver I have is Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton and Tom Brady at 61, 62, and 63. Now, you can look at ADPs. You can take the last guys on those tier. I would really try to go out of my way to target Russell Wilson. He's going right now around pick number 65, 66 in redraft head-to-head leagues. I think anytime after round 5, depending on who else was on the board, if I had no one else higher on my list, I would go with Russell Wilson. Now, you have Rodgers at 1, Brady at 2. I'm kind of buying the Watson hype. I backed off of it a little bit, but I cannot be talked out of Deshaun Watson. Even if he regresses by 20%, he's still going to be pretty damn good. But Russell Wilson, to me, stands out as the best value of the top-end quarterbacks. But how early would you actually take a quarterback in a draft?
Literally never before the 11th round.
No, ever.
I mean, not even looking at, the quarterback section of my rankings, or if I'm using the top 150, well, I have them so friggin' low in the top 150 that they're never even like in consideration if I'm like checking guys off,
So who are those guys then? Who are those later guys? Is it like, you talk about the Atlanta offense, could it be Matt Ryan? If in a deeper league, would you wait for someone like, let's say like Eli Manning, who everyone likes all of his weapons but hates him? It's kind of strange. But like Phillip Rivers is ultra consistent. So is Matt Stafford. Is there one guy in general that you're just sort of targeting in that 11th, 12th, 13th round?
Yeah, Matt Ryan is where I start to look. I think that of the late round quarterbacks, he offers the best value. We talked about how I think that offense is going to experience a lot of positive touchdown regression, and he's going to be at the epicenter of that. So that's where I begin, but I usually don't get him. Marcus Mariota is another guy who I definitely look at a lot, but I usually don't get him either. I mean, I'm taking, Trubisky. I'm taking Blake Bortles. I'm taking Mahomes a little bit. Even late down to like Ryan Tannehill. Now I'm mostly playing in best ball leagues right now, and you end up taking 2 and even sometimes 3 guys in those leagues. So it's a little bit different from season long. And in a season long redraft where I'm making weekly roster decisions and I can't just have 2 or 3 guys and I'm getting the best score from those guys every week, that's where I'll probably go a little earlier on a guy like Matt Ryan. But he's definitely squarely in the crosshairs for me as I start to think about drafting teams in weekly management leagues.
So of the guys that you're taking later in draft, so 10th round and beyond, are there certain names that continue to pop up? Because for me, he's not going there anymore, but Pierre Garçon, someone in like the 7th round, 8th round that I like to invest in. Randall Cobb is someone that I'm ending up with a lot of. Rashard Matthews, who people have completely written off because this is Corey Davis's team now. Rashard Matthews sucks. Can't use him. But I like Mariota, and I think that he has a nice rapport with Rashard Matthews. And I just think he's criminally underrated to begin with. And lately, I've been buying up more shares of Jamison Crowder. So who are the guys from down there that you like?
Yeah, I like all those guys that you just mentioned, first of all. And in that same group, Kenny Stills. Kenny Stills last year quietly saw a career high 105 targets. He was a top 30 fantasy receiver, even with Jay Cutler at quarterback, and Jay Cutler was just atrocious last year. You're missing almost 300 targets in this Dolphins passing game with Jarvis Landry gone and a couple other guys gone. And Kenny Stills is a guy who can slip into the slot and run those higher percentage routes, whereas Devontae Parker, he's like an 80% perimeter receiver. Kenny Stills last year was almost at 50% slot routes. And he averaged more yards per route run on slot routes than Jarvis Landry did last year. And with Jarvis Landry gone, that immediately frees up 90 targets just in the slot alone. Now, I think that, theoretically, most of those end up going to Albert Wilson and Danny Amendola. But I'll take, even if it's a small bump in slot routes and slot targets for Kenny Stills, because those are higher percentage, to just up his reception count. And then, you combine that with his big playability. He's always had that. Kenny Stills is a guy that is right in that same mix with a guy like Rashard Matthews. And, I've started to take Jordy Nelson.
Oh God.
I know, and it's kind of scary, but you think about it, like there is no red zone threat on the Raiders offense. I mean, Amari Cooper has always struggled in the red zone or not even been targeted in the red zone. Jared Cook has never scored touchdowns, has always been a terrible confined space receiver. If I can get 6, 7, 8 touchdowns out of Jordy Nelson in the 10th or 11th round, I'm going for that. And then, again, looking back at his game speed didn't change from 2016 to 2017. It was about the same. He wasn't very good, even with Aaron Rodgers in there. But I think he can end up with a lot more targets than we expect, especially if Amari Cooper continues to plateau and Martavis Bryant doesn't play this year, which looks like a possibility. There have been reports that he's facing some sort of discipline. And we're gonna learn about that, I would expect, by the start of training camp.
Well, you mentioned the key name. That name would be Jordy Nelson, and he ranks number 2 on my worst place list. He didn't make the rankings because I don't want to own any Jordy Nelson. This is the corpse of Jordy Nelson. I'm not buying it. I'm not buying Mark Ingram. Never going to be on one of my teams. Jared Cook, also someone I just can't stand. He's not going to be on my teams. Neither is Doug Martin. Just a lot of Raiders in general. Apparently, I hate the Raiders. Who knew? And Kelvin Benjamin is just someone I do not want to own. I'm not going through that. I just don't think that he is any good. But
I'm with you on Benjamin. He stinks.
If it was up to you, and you had to put Mark Ingram in the rankings somewhere at running back, what would be the tier he would be around? What would be an acceptable draft position for you to actually take him?
Again, I think I have him at RB 35. I don't know exactly where that would be in terms of tiers. It depends on where how you're tiering your guys. Are you being very strict with your tiers? Are you making big tiers?
I make pretty big tiers. So would he be in the, let's say, would you say James White or Mark Ingram?
I'd probably I'd shoot my shot on Mark Ingram.
Carlos Hyde or Mark Ingram?
I think he'd be right there with Carlos Hyde.
All right.
I mean, there's just so much uncertainty in that Cleveland backfield.
All right. So am I okay to put Mark Ingram in between Carlos Hyde and CJ Anderson then?
Yeah. Yep.
All right, so we'll put Mark Ingram in there. Jordy Nelson, who you apparently like, would you take him or Kenny Golladay?
I'd take Jordy Nelson right now. His sheer target projection is just a lot higher than Kenny Galladay's.
All right, Will Fuller or Jordy Nelson?
Will Fuller for sure.
All right, Tyrell the Gazelle Williams or Jordy Nelson?
Jordy.
All right, so there's the spot for Jordy. I'm not even going to rank Jared Cook because he sucks. Doug Martin, unrankable?
Man, I mean, like, I can't stomach players that can't play, okay? But at some point he comes into play depending on the depth of your league.
Okay,
you're in the 18th round, and it's like, am I taking him or, the third string running back for, some other team? And I'm probably taking Doug Martin in that instance. All
right, so you got Doug Martin or Jordan Wilkins.
Jordan Wilkins.
Yeah, okay. His teammate, Rocket Richard or Doug Martin.
Rocket Richard is going to get cut, sadly.
Oh, he's so good, though. He's so
I
fast. Why would anyone have Doug Martin on their team when they could have Rocket Richard?
This is not a question for me. This is a question for John Gruden.
All right, so I'll put in Doug Martin in there. So we're both good with no Kelvin Benjamin?
Please, no.
Okay, so Jared Cook. Do you have an affinity at all for Jared Cook? Should he be Vance McDonald or Jared Cook?
I mean, he caught 54 balls last year. That's good for a tight end.
Yeah,
his ceiling is like.
I don't want to look back at.
His for touchdowns is like 1.5.
I don't want to look at his game logs, but I'm going to assume all those 50 catches came over the span of 2 games, because that's what Jared Cook does. Have you ever tried to play Jared Cook in DFS? You know what he gets? 0 points.
I never play him because I primarily play on and I need touchdowns.
The site that shall not be named.
Shit. Can you edit that out?
No, I'll just put a beep in there.
Fuck. That was Total brain fart right there.
Oh, don't worry about it. You think they're watching this deep into the show? No chance.
Okay, good.
All right, that will do it. The preview series, you're releasing everything one team per day, it seems now.
Basically, I mean, sometimes something will come up, or I'll get 2 done in one day, but usually it's 1 a day. Yeah.
All right, so does that mean you get any sort of break between now and January 12th?
I don't take breaks, Pat Mayo.
See, this is why you had to come on the show. I never take breaks either. Although I do, is I film ahead, and then people think that I'm here doing shows. I'm in like Mexico or something. That's the glory of doing not always. Well, football right now is not bad. You can do football right now, plan ahead a little bit, and hopefully no one gets hurt and no one notices. Sometimes it happens though. It sucks. So when can we expect your updated rankings? Start of training camp, you said?
Yes, sir.
All right. Well, good luck with that, and good luck writing these team previews. I told you I wrote all the baseball team previews one year in like 2010, and it was like the worst experience of my life. Never did better at fantasy baseball, but it was grueling.
It's worth it, man. I think it's worth it. I mean, I'm like, again, I got like 8 or 9 left. Training camp starts really starts to kick into high gear in like the 23rd or something like that. So I should have about a week there if I can be efficient. About a week there where I can, I don't know, go see a movie.
Ooh. Yeah, I'm sure there's. I don't go see movies anymore, but I'm sure there's plenty.
I don't either.
There's plenty of good ones in your local cinema, which everyone wants to sponsor this show for when it comes out around the time that Evan could have a week off. And you let me know. I'll see if I can get you free tickets or something like that. So we can work on that later. I'm Pat Mayo. You can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the PME. You can find my rankings up on DKPlaybook.com. Evan's rankings, of course, on RotoWorld.com, and that will do it. Subscribe to the Pat Mayo Experience audio versions if you're just watching this on the video, or vice versa. You can subscribe to the DraftKings YouTube channel if you're listening to this and you got all the friendly graphics that are going to be up. It's top-notch stuff. You might as well download them both. Help me out a little bit, all right? I'm Pat Mayo. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo Experience! Experience!